Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never met me before, you know I take a little bit of a break when I hear the fire trucks and the ambulances go by my apartment. It's in that intent that possibly they'll get to their destination, turn around, and go right back to the station, right? We want everybody to have that moment of, you know, calmness in their systems, have that little bit of unexpected resolution to whatever that discomfort is in our lives. I've been having these conversations, practicing my craft. And lots of people in the building that I live in don't have air conditioning. So they sit out in the front of the building, out in the benches, and they enjoy the garden and they socialize with each other. And as I'm reselling and coming in and out from walks and bike rides and stuff, they all know who I am, but they're very respectful of my privacy. They're not knocking on my door, but when they see me, they always stop me, or I stop to say hello. And we have a little bit of a conversation. And in practicing that craft, I do throw out that good cheer. Not quite sure if I do it properly, if I'm putting enough intent into it. But I think the idea is that I can just go about my day to day, that I could just be the person that I am, and whatever needs is the need in that moment, that I'm just going to trust that those other parts of me, right, will take care of it. And in those conversations, in the lessons and little gifts that come across my path, that I'm able to reveal it to whoever I'm speaking to, whoever I'm interacting with, and that they'll get a little something out of it. And at the same time, I get a little something out of it, right? And it is kind of a mutual interaction. I'm going to call it an interaction, not a transaction, because, a lot of what I do, it's kind of under the surface. I'm going to say it's under the surface, even under the surface for myself. Like I said, I'm not always understanding how it works, but I can most definitely recognize when it does work. And it's a really good feeling. And it's kind of nice that people, even though I haven't built those relationships up, I don't know people's names. I recognize them by their face in the hellos that we exchange in the elevators or outdoors and stuff, that they trust me enough in that openness. And actually, I have to say, lots of times it's a lot easier for people to open up when they don't know you, when they're not having those regular interactions, because lots of people are private and lots of people have trust issues and they worry about, ooh, who are you going to chit chat to? Who are you going to pass this information along to? So it's kind of nice that in my small interactions that I have built up a bit of a trust. They all know my name, but I don't know, maybe on my one hand, I could say names of people in this building. And I think I've been here now for 5 years, 5 or 6 years now. That's a long time. This place was only supposed to be temporary for me, right? Just long enough to get me on my feet. And then to find myself kind of unstable in my on my feet, that this turned out to be the most perfect place for me to be. It's a it's a place that I can financially manage, that is central and in a neighborhood that I have lived in for most of the, how many years have I been here? 40 years now. I've lived in Winnipeg, Manitoba. One of the best decisions I think that I have ever made, right? And it was a hard decision, not the decision itself to come here, but the decision to ask if I could join in the move. My family was moving to Winnipeg without me when I was 18 years old. I was fresh out of high school. It was actually the summer, and my dad came home, and like he usually did, he just laid it on us and he says, "We're moving." And I just assumed that I was included in that scenario. And I just said, "Oh my goodness, I had just made plans with my friend Linda, to get an apartment. We hadn't found one yet, but I had been building up my hope chest since I was like 12 years old, collecting things for when I moved out of my house, because every day I heard from my mother, "I can't wait for the day you turn 18. You are so out of my house." And I was ready to be out of the house at 12 years old in my mind. But again, like this place, I really didn't have the know-how or the resources or just the understanding as to how to take care of myself. When my dad came home, I think it was in August he came home. It was on my 18th birthday. And he came, well, just before my 18th birthday. No, I was 18 already. Yes, because I remember when I came to Winnipeg, I found out that it was already legal for me to be in the bars and the nightclubs because the drinking age was 18 years old, right? And so that big thing about when your friends and your family take you to a bar or take you out for your first cocktails at 19, because that was the age, and in Vancouver, well, I had already been legal for a year by the time I got here. So that's how come I know that I was 18 years old. And we were planning in September, me and my girlfriend, to get our apartment and get jobs. We'd already, both of us had really good jobs, but it just seemed so easy for me to pick up and increase my wage in increasing not the quality of the job, but just finding those good paying jobs. And the person that I was at the age that I was all about money, because money was something that was a shortage growing up in my family. So we all, as kids, turned into little entrepreneurs, and we were all bringing in incomes at a very early age. But I always seemed to get these really great jobs, but these jobs were usually in restaurants. I'd work in the kitchen. I remember just before I actually got an offer as a kitchen manager in a steakhouse at 18 years old. And well, being highly sensitive, being empathic, understanding our self worth comes through the reflection of others. I busted my butt for that offer. It was an offer I wasn't expecting, but it fell in my lap anyway. But it was the idea that it wasn't a compliment to me. I was the most capable for that position, right? I was the most capable. They knew they had a workhorse in me. So when my dad came home that day and he says, "Oh my goodness," he says, "we're all moving to Winnipeg." we were used to moving. Like I had been to like 11 different elementary schools growing up, right? Only two high schools. But it was like we moved every 2 years all through my school years. So it was nothing new for my dad to come home and lay that on us. But it was the first time we had moved out of the province of British Columbia. We lived in many different towns, many different cities. I actually lived on a farm for 6 months when my dad bought a piece of property. But when he said that, I just assumed that I was included because he says, we're moving to Winnipeg, right? And I was fresh out of high school. But I did recognize that me and my friend had made these plans, and I vocalized that. And I said, oh, but me and Linda, we're supposed to be getting our apartment. And then my mom pipes up right away, you're not coming. And the fear hit me like total terror. I had never been on my own in my entire life. I loved my independence. I loved being out of the house as much as I possibly could growing up, unless my dad was home. In that case, I wanted to be by his side, right? But that idea that the whole family was leaving me behind, that really broke me. That really broke me. And I didn't want to be left behind. And I remembered that night that I'm sitting out on the porch. My dad came out and sat next to me, and we always had these talks. And I asked him, I says, can you talk to mom and see if I can come to Winnipeg too? And he says, I'll try, Cindy, I'll try, right? But my mother was looking forward to me being out of the house. If you guys have been with me for any length of time, you know I come from a very dynamic family, and the relationship that I had with my mother was very strained and very strange, right? Can you hear the rain? We might get a little bit of thunder and lightning. I opened up my window here and I turned off the air conditioning just to get some fresh air, and I wanted to clean the screen so I can have a proper view when the storms do come. So I've got that in the shower bathtub right now. It's all clean. It's just got to dry before I put it back in. I might not even put it back in. If I we don't get any mosquitoes this summer, then I might not even put it back in, right? I get a good view out my window without that screen. But anyway, back to my story. It took quite a while. It took about 2 weeks before my father came back with that answer. And he says, your mother has agreed that you can come to Winnipeg with us. Just like this. And then I had to go and break the news to my friend, and she was pretty upset with me because we had these big plans, like in the next month or so, that we were getting our own place, right? And I was excited for that. But I wasn't ready to leave my family, right? My sisters, those relationships, and especially when they were going to a totally different province. I was really afraid that I was truly going to be by myself forever. That's what I kind of thought. And of course, you guys know that my dad had congenital heart disease, and one of my greatest fears was that I wasn't going to be there for him when he passed away. Like, right? It was a really stressful. I think it was only a couple of weeks. It was only a couple of weeks, and my parents were gone. They loaded everything up in a moving truck and had it shipped out. My parents and my two youngest sisters got on a train and took a train to Winnipeg. Me and my sister Tracy, she had to say her goodbyes and stuff too. She had a boyfriend. She may have had a couple. And she needed to tie things off with them because it was a surprise to them too, right? So we took a plane out to Winnipeg, to this province here. And I got off the plane, and that heat just smacked me in the face. The first thing that we noticed was how many trees this province, this city had. Just trees everywhere. And you can see for so far away. Like, no matter where you are, you could just turn around and you could pretty much see the whole city. And we have, oh my goodness, 500,000 people in the city of Winnipeg. So it's a pretty big city, too, right? But it was the best move that I ever made. And I did have a friend who lived in Winnipeg. They were living in Vancouver, and somebody who went out with a girlfriend of mine, and he moved back to Winnipeg. So as soon as I got here, right, I got a hold of him, and he had already been in the bars and stuff. So it was a friend that, we are who we surround ourselves with, right? He was somebody that I knew. And, I guess he liked to drink. I can't really remember. We're going back quite a ways. But we became best friends. We really did. And I really hope that Ray is having an amazing life right now, because he was a good friend for me. And he really helped me to settle my system, right? I didn't stay in the house very long. I think I stayed here for about 6 months until I found my wings, right? That I was ready to leave the house, but I wanted to make sure dad was okay, everybody was okay. And then me and my sister Tracy, we moved back to Vancouver. I was only there for probably um, maybe 6 months. I got another job, made so much money there as a kitchen cook, and I never got a job that paid that well ever again in my entire life. And I think I was only maybe just turned 19 years old. And, of course, I made more money in tips because I stayed in hospitality, right? And I stayed in my front door. I stayed in hospitality, right? But it was the tips that were so good. But when I'm talking about an hourly wage, my entire life I never had a job after that paid me such a high hourly wage. I stayed in Vancouver for another 6 months. And then, right, I missed my dad. I missed my sisters. And, I came back to Winnipeg, but I didn't stay, right? I didn't stay. They had already moved into a new house, something smaller that was just accommodate, you know, my mom and dad and my two younger sisters. And so I got a job as a nanny, right? I got a job as a nanny and I really hated it, right? I love taking care of the house. I love the children, right? Because I related to the kids quite a bit because they had very strict parents too. The mother was very loving, but the father was very, very strict and heavy handed. And, being that protector that I was and being able to resonate with that child, right? I became very attached to the children, but I felt like a prisoner. Nothing in that house belonged to me. They built me a suite in the basement. They let me pick the colors for my living room and for my bedroom but it was still a prison. And I was there 6 days a week. And I only had one day, Sunday, off. And I would go visit my father, and we would go for, by that time, he wasn't walking very well, but we'd go for little short walks, or we'd go stand outside and we'd have nice conversations, a nice visit. And then I would hop on a bus and I would go back to, my job because I had to start in the morning. So I couldn't even stay over Not that I would, I couldn't stay over at my father's place. In that process, our relationship even got stronger for me and my father, but I could see that he was really struggling by that time, right? And he taught me how to drive, and I got my first car, right? It's just so amazing. And then when my and then I got out of that job. I quit that job, and that was really hard. They begged me, they cried, they offered me more money, they got angry, they threatened. But I held my own on that because I had to find that escape. Because, like I said, I felt like a prisoner in somebody else's home. I didn't want to be somebody's servant. And so I got my own apartment, and it was really a great luck out. Like right, I hated job interviews, but I'd always scored these amazing jobs whenever I applied. It was only in my confidence, it was only in my right in my stress of going to ask for something, because I was brought up not to ask. And so when you're applying for a job, that's asking, isn't it? So it was a very stressful thing for me, but I always got great jobs. And I ended up caretaking two different apartments. So I got a free apartment and I got a check every month, right? It was absolutely just fantastic. And I set up a really great little life for me in that process. Now, I don't know why I came up with that conversation, because shortly after that, my grandfather, right, I had just moved in with my friend, and we were going to caretake the two buildings that were across the lane from each other. We were going to do it together, and we were pretty excited about it. He moved in and everything was going great. And then my dad asked me if my grandfather could come and stay with me, because my grandfather's doctors said that they were going to put him in a home because he was a chronic alcoholic, and he had just come, what do you call that, he just got better, right? He just recovered from tuberculosis. So he was in a pretty bad state too. But my grandfather was a really bad alcoholic, and he was really mean. Epigenetically, right? These traumas are passed down from one generation to another. So as much as I had a dynamic upbringing, my father had a dynamic upbringing, which is kind of odd, because he chose a partner who was strong handed. We'll just say that. Very strong handed, heavy handed, okay? And yet, my father, epigenetically, should have been that person in the family that I was in, but he wasn't. And it was because he had already woken up to some of his own ideas, and he was practicing mindset, right? My father was a very kind, loving person. I never heard him raise his voice in my entire life, but what came to my mind is the one time that we were playing out on the farm on one of the sheds, right? We were only there for 6 months. There were so many sheds on that farm, but he thought somebody had kidnapped his kids. But we had found wheels and wood, and we were building a go-kart in one of these sheds, and we didn't even hear him calling us. And eventually he found us, and he yelled, but he yelled out of relief, not out of anger, right? Because he was really worried that, he always had problems, because he had four girls. He always had problems with the creepy guys and stuff, right? Trying to take advantage of his kids, and they did, right? But those are stories that belong to others, right? Not pertinent in this conversation. But I got away and from that job, which was really difficult. And of course, I was not going to let my grandfather go stay with my father, because that's what would have happened. My grandfather would have been shipped out to Manitoba and he would have ended up with my dad, and my dad would have been gone because my grandfather was so, if he wasn't drinking, he was very sweet. He was a very nice, responsible, hardworking man. But when he was drinking, man, just cruel, just I can't even describe the person that he was. And I couldn't believe the things that he would say about my dad. I kicked my boy, well, my friend, I kicked my friend out of the apartment. That was another hard one too, because my grandfather just ended, I didn't think he was going to show up because he was an alcoholic. I just figured he'd be going off somewhere else, but somehow he made it to Winnipeg and he knocked on my door and I opened up the door and there he was, right? So my grandfather ended up caretaking with me. We we stayed caretaking in those buildings for a couple of years, but in my grandfather's issues, he was handling the rent money improperly, meaning spending it and then trying to cover it at the end of the month with his pension. He would let people from the bar sleep in the furnace room, and I'd go in there for the vacuum cleaner and I'd have all these passed out people, right? And I'd freak right out and he'd go, I know what it's like to live in a bus shack. And I'm just like, how do I argue with that? And I never argued anyway. He was an elder, so of course, right? I just let him do what he was doing. I didn't have that voice, though at times I did. Otherwise, I would have stayed in that nanny position because they did everything they could to keep me, right? And again, it wasn't because they absolutely loved me. It was because they ruled me, because I accommodated them, because I didn't say no, right? And, these were lessons I didn't learn until much later in my life, right? There were moments when I could just take as much as I could take and then it had to end. But the way I was brought up to take a lot, right? To not ever say no, not to ask for what I needed. So if I did ask for what I needed, you can believe me, I was serious about it. Eventually, right, I got my grandfather out of that apartment, not intently. He did it to himself, he did it to us, right? And my father passed away shortly afterwards. When that happened, you know, I just went about living my own life. I did. I appreciated my sisters very much. Family was very important to me, right? But I was free to live and create the life that I wanted. And I was well into my 20s by then, and I was living for the first time by my own wants and needs and desires. And I truly did feel a sense of freedom in that, and that creativeness in being able to create the person that I wanted to be. And that's when I first learned that I could be myself, because I didn't want to be somebody that ever again that was ruled over, right? I didn't ever want to be that person that, had to cover their tracks, with lying and stuff. I wanted to be myself. And so that people, when I met them, I could just carry on being the person that I was rather than being a person that would be comfortable for somebody else, right? I still didn't get the hang of saying no, but being a genuine person, it was kind of like values, setting boundaries, right? that I made sure that everybody knew that this was the person that I am, right? And it was incredible to find out that people really did like me for who I was. And so I kept up in that genuineness. I kept up in being the person that I was because I didn't want people to be in my life for the wrong reason. Because when people were in my life and representing that, that they liked me, that we were good friends, and then the moment they betrayed me or they stole from me or they verbally or physically went at me, then, I would be taken aback and I would be really, really hurt by that. So for me, it was a no brainer that I wanted people to be able to be comfortable. That was the deal, right? You let me be who I am, you accept me for who I am, warts and all, right? That I will do the same for you. And I created the most amazing relationships, right? That was just the beginning of my life starting to improve in my 20s. It started. I didn't wake up until these ideas until well into my 50s, but the process started without me, right? Because I allowed myself to be the person that I was, right? It's not it's not a good per- uh not a good feeling when you have to chameleon through your life, when you have to create airs and stories about your life that aren't true just to make yourself look better than others or smarter than what people think you are, right? It's just a different feeling, right? It's something that I really appreciate because when I was saying that just now, the first thing that came to my mind is when I quit wearing makeup. Like there was a time that I wouldn't even go to the corner store for a quart of milk without lathering on the makeup. Not like it did any good, right? By that time, I had put myself in such a state, right? By that time, I was over 300 pounds, right? 300 pounds. I really did have some self-worth issues, but grateful that I found myself in communities, in friendship groups with people who really did care for me, right? And that was actually a miracle. And that was by my own doing too. But also, it really served my friends. It really served the people that I hung out with because they could be the person that they were. They didn't have to hide behind those same airs. They didn't have to, right, be somebody special, somebody beautiful, somebody, right? We all have faults physically, mentally, emotionally, but we wear these masks. And, when you wear these masks for too long, you forget who you really are. And actually, for myself, I wore masks my entire life. And like I said, it wasn't until I was well into my 20s before I recognized that life was a little bit better if I was just myself, right? And it was easier too because lying became something that I was quite adverse from. Now, I picked it up again when I started gambling because I had to lie about how I was always broke and how I couldn't pay my bills and stuff. So I was started fibbing again. And of course that beat me, right? That was devastating to me, especially being somebody who prided themselves on being somebody who was truthful, right? I didn't give up all the, what do you call that, ammo for others, right? I didn't offer up stuff if it wasn't asked for, right? But at the same time, if somebody asked me a question, I would be straight with them, right? Even if that straightness was, oh, I don't want to talk about that, right? But on the norm, being truthful, it saved me from trying to figure out when somebody asked me something. Oh, they asked me this before. What did I say last time? Oh, I said this to somebody else. So I got to make sure because they're friends with this person that it's the exact same story because, right? Always covering your butt and being the sensitive that I am and being in a group full of sensitives, right? There were narcissists too, because you right at the time I didn't know they were called narcissists, but people that didn't treat me well, that didn't get along with me, that decided that they were king and wanted me to be the servant, right? And that's pretty much what a narcissist is. So we'd have those people in our groups too, because highly sensitives and empaths, we like that energy, right? We were attracted to that energy. I don't know why. I do believe that God or whoever or whatever has a plan down the road, right? Down the road, not in the moment. It doesn't make sense, but down the road, there's a reason, right? That maybe it's that diversity somewhere's down the road that mixture needs to be mixed together. But right now, I think we're doing good in just allowing the different cultures and the different, you know, um, idealisms and traditionals come into our lives. That's enough to keep us busy for the next while, and it's enough mix to keep our lines strong, right? Because it does offer up gifts in mixing, right? With each other. Cindy, I truly think and believe I feel that you have done a phenomenal job in the person that you are today and everything that you accomplished and done and become. That's awesome, Cindy. I'm so proud of you. Oh, Tammy. Thank you. I appreciate that you say that. And I'm going to say that I appreciate that because I recognize that in myself. But it's kind of nice when other people say it, right? Because I trust Tammy that she would not be blowing smoke up my bum bum. Like she's truthful and she recognizes and sees me and she's been with me long enough and been in my every piece of content that I've ever put out there. She has been in that, right? And she has been with me. And, we do need this mirroring, right? And it's important, this, right? These people that can recognize us for who we are. And that's why I'm so grateful for all the people and all the experiences that have come into my life that allowed me to grow into the person. Well, I think probably I was always meant to be, or I always was, but kind of got lost in the mix, right? Because we're all impacted by those relationships. We are the one of the five people that we surround ourselves with, right? So, being around all these dynamic people, of course, we're going to rub up against them. We're going to pick up different traits from different people. But in doing that, you get to have experiences. You get to be a spectator and a student, and you get to have conversations with people that are so different from you, different from anybody that you might have met. And that's incredible because that opens you up to the opportunity to even meet more people because you find these small commonalities, that you've been introduced to in your friends. And then these small commonalities sometimes are just enough to get you into a conversation or a relationship with an absolute stranger. Whereas, if you felt that they were above you or beyond you or somebody that you couldn't relate to because you don't understand about golfing because that's all they do is talk about golf, or you don't understand what about hockey or uh, all kinds of things. Everybody has so many personal, unique interests of their own, right? And, lots of times we're not interested in them. But, if we pick that information up, sometimes it is enough to get you into a conversation. And I use that skill all the time. Like I said, I walk out of this building and everybody's outside, nobody's got air conditioning, they're all sitting outside trying to cool off, and it's Cindy, hi Cindy, and it was just like, and so you stop and you give those little short conversations, those small connections that in the moment might not seem important, but they might be everything to somebody who doesn't have that opportunity to connect, right? Because, lots of people, they don't know how to connect. Lots of people were brought up like I was, not to ask, to mind your own business, keep it personal. Don't show people your issues, right? And then we're all walking around with masks and pretending to be somebody that we're not. And, if you're doing that, then people are going to see you and think that you're something that you're not. And maybe you're just the person they really do need to have a conversation or a small interaction with, right? That you are actually more relatable than they think that you are, because we hold these, right? These masks, these characters. And like I said, you can be in it for so long that you forget who you are. I'm grateful that I've only expanded, right? Because I've allowed myself that. I think it's a privilege, a gift, right? Just to be myself. I think it's something that almost everybody appreciates, right? Because you've got an open book. And of course, people can use that as ammo, but I use that to my advantage also, because I recognize those characters, right? 3 people out of 10 are absolutely not going to like you. It's just a fact. They just can't stand you. They can't stand the way you talk. They can't stand the way you look. They can't stand being in the same room as you, right? They just don't like it. 3 out of 10. But 2 out of those 3 people that don't like you will know better than to open up their mouth or to say anything. Maybe their parents have taught them good etiquette growing up. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? And you can manage. This is why I can manage so well with controlled narcissists, right? Because not every narcissist is somebody to fear. Sometimes they're just big know it alls, right? And you can ignore a know it all. You can walk out of a room with a know it all. You can shut them down. You can gray rock. There's so many things you can do with a narcissist. And also, sometimes, quite often, the narcissists are smarter. They are the way they are because they don't think anybody recognizes how smart or talented or efficient they are. So they have to drill it into people. Those aren't the people that I'm talking about, right? One of those 3 people is that person. that narcissist, but they have an extra trait. They hate you so much. They dislike you so much. And Tammy, you know these people. We've had little conversations about these people, right? They go for the jugular. They'll try to take you out. They will say terrible things. They will talk behind your back. They will try and get you fired. They'll try and get you in trouble. They'll try and make you look bad. Those are the ones that you have to watch out for. But when you're genuine, when you're yourself, and you recognize that they're triggering you because they know something that bothers you, right? They recognize that they can cross your boundaries, right? And you'll take a little bit. You will. But that's the person that you worry about. Yes, I've had many of those people in my life. And I'm grateful because I've been able to recognize them, right away. I'm not so worried about the know-it-alls. I'm not so worried about the ones with the right. They talk nasty about people and stuff, but when they go for the jugular, right, when they try to take you out, I had those people in my own life, right? I have. And I had to tolerate them when I grew up. But I recognized how dangerous they were, and I was able to avoid the best that I could, and to hold my ground where I could, and to stay out of the picture as much as I could. But sometimes you can't, because that's at your job, that's in your family, right? That's your next door neighbor. That's your school teacher. Oh my goodness, I had a couple of those too, right? And yeah, this idea of being genuine and being open, it allowed me to recognize, because when you're not genuine, when you're wearing a mask, they don't know what's going to trigger you, right? Because you're representing something that you're not, right? So they'll tiptoe around you because they don't have your story, right? It doesn't make them any less dangerous in your life. But I'm only grateful that I recognize that it's only 1 out of 10. That could be the customer that comes in and asks to speak to the manager, or I'm calling the head office. And you did it. You're like, what did I do? But you don't need to do anything. It's only because we rub each other the wrong way, right? And that's why it's so important to recognize, that these people are out there, and you'll recognize them by how they bite, right? Because they actually do bite, not physically bite, but I'm right. They go for the jugular, they try to take you out, and they do it with enthusiasm, and they do it with as much of an audience, and they always have I second that, meaning they have their backup. They have that one person that's always going to say, I agree with you, she was right, she did do this, right? So you watch for those too, right? People, it's interesting, when you have these unique experiences in our lives, that we pick up these, you know, how do I say this? It's in our hypervigilance. They're the gifts. And I always say, I earned that badge to recognize that person. I earned that badge, right? to recognize when somebody is not being straight up with me, when somebody is being sneaky, when somebody is trying to take me out. And of course, lots of times because they have that backup, you really don't have any backup yourself. And then it gets to that situation, it's me or them. And because they have the backup, obviously, all you can do is say adios, right? And that can be hard too, because some of your favorite people could be not recognizing who that person was, right? Think that they're the be all to end all, an absolute angel. And in truth, right? They just hide it, just like everybody else hides it, right? And it works for them, right? But highly sensitives and empaths, right? They're easy targets quite often because I don't know, right? We don't know how to say no, and we don't know how to ask, right? And we don't have that self worth and that confidence, but only in the moment because we can choose differently in a moment. I did. I woke up to some of these ideas, and ever since I've been running with that ball, and it has served me quite well. And then again, right? There are always side effects in the process, but I have to say, when I talk about, you know, being 80 years old and rocking in my rocking chair and looking back at my life, I'm not going to regret being able to be hyper vigilant because I used and utilized those gifts. I earned those badges, and those badges are mine. And how I choose to use them is how I'm going to use them, right? Okay, you guys. I don't know why I went into that conversation. I got led into it by something that I don't even remember what, but I'll come into my life and watch it again and see what's in there. Cindy, I can relate in many ways with you, Cindy, on how I was raised and grew up. We were pretty much almost grew up in the same era, too. Plus, my home life in some ways was like yours, too. So I can relate. You know what? So many people relate, but because they turn the other cheek, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Two wrongs don't make a right. We are brought up with these things that are weaponized against us. And so, right, we are not able to get a handle on these things. This day and age, it's getting a lot better. Here in Canada, we have bullying campaigns in school. We have Orange T shirt day, which is set up in recognition for, how we mistreated the Indigenous kids by putting them in, schools, right? And tried to make them be European. Like we wouldn't even let them hold on to their own languages, So there are indigenous languages out there that are only used by the elders. They're not, and there's so few elders now that actually know their mother tongue because they were in white schools being taught how to be white. Right? And I don't mean to laugh at that, but it seems kind of silly when you look back at it, how we try to take people's lives away from them, right? That people have to walk around wearing masks that don't belong to them. And then they wear these masks pretending that they're right, physically, emotionally, mentally great, and they don't get the help that they need because of it. And I would hate to think that, I would end up at the end of days rocking in that rocking chair and knowing that right to my last days that that was the person that I was, because I was that person for a very long time, right? For a very long time. You guys know I had some funky conversations going on at times. So, it's kind of nice that in this day and age, I, as a small man, that I can have a voice, and being here on my platforms, that I could be myself. And in being myself, it's like that saying, right? I'm giving permission to others that they can be themselves too. And in doing that, there is healing in that. I was saying, just a few days ago, how much I appreciate, that some of these indigenous have their own Instagrams and TikToks and Facebooks, and they make and YouTube shorts, and they're making these videos, and they're voicing, I've been sober for 365 days. I've been sober for 5 years. I've been sober for 7 years. Look at this is my nephew. He's sober now 300 days, and this is my wife, and she's been sober for 2 weeks. See, that's the example that we set for others, so that others can understand that they can do it too. And it works. That's why you guys hear me say all the time, right? That we have to be the example for each other. We have to be the evidence that it can be done. But unless we're our true selves, right? And unless people can recognize that we're our true selves, then we're not going to build in that trust, are we? We're not going to be able to trust people that they're going to lead us in a good direction, that they truly are sober because they're wearing a mask, and they're going home every night and drinking away, and they're coming in and telling everybody that they're sober, right? And you can always tell when somebody isn't straight with us, right? Yeah. I just thinking of a lady I bumped into in the laundry room today. Right out of it, I didn't understand one word that she was saying, but I smiled and I nodded my head. Right? Right? But she tried. But, she doesn't have platforms. She's not putting out the good word out there. But you sure as hell would recognize it if she did, that it wasn't true. Right? Yeah. The idea is to get people comfortable enough to be themselves. And to be comfortable enough, it means people have to feel safe. And in being safe, a big part of that is to be able to trust the people that you surround yourself with, right? So I'm grateful that even though I wasn't woke up to any of these ideas, that in my 20s, that I was already getting a head start, right? I didn't recognize until I had already earned that badge that it was okay to carry on in what I was doing, because it served me right, right? It served me well. And like I said, I earned those badges, right? And it will serve just like it served those small interactions that I have every time I walk out of this building and bump into people that live in this building. We have small little chit chats and interactions, and then we can leave those conversations, and both of us feeling good by it, feeling something clicked, something made us feel a little bit less heavy in our lives. Okay. Uh, yes, I hear you, Cindy. I believe the 3 out of 10. Yeah, the 3 out of 10. 2 out of those 3 people will have been brought up well enough by their parents, right? It starts with our parents to teach the kids good etiquette, to teach the kids how to be kind. And even if in their mentality, they're not that kind person, you can say whatever you want in your mind, right? But when you're around me, right, you're going to be kind, right? You're not going to disrespect anybody, you know, and it's just not kindness to me, but it's kindness to those that I surround myself with, right? Because that's influence, isn't it? That's influence, and you don't need that bad influence around you. And when you have those masks, it's kind of heartbreaking to find out that somebody didn't care for you as much as you cared for them. And I've stepped into that doo-doo many times. But that won't be a conversation for tonight. I think that's kind of enough to digest. Let me have a sip of my grape Sprite. It is so good. Like I tell you, if they put Welch's grape Sprite on the market, that stuff would sell. That stuff would sell for sure. Okay, you guys, let's grab a card. If you've never hung out with me before, these are 54 powerful words. I pull a card. Sometimes it's pertinent to the conversation. Sometimes it's not. We just go into something else for a couple of minutes and then we call it a night, right? Until the next time we meet. Okay, you guys. Oh my goodness, we had this word this week. We did have this word this week. The word we have today, Danielle, willingness is faith over doubt. And it is a little bit, you can relate it to the conversation tonight, but it is in that willingness to be stretched, that willingness to expand in what we understand, that willingness to see what doesn't work and be willing to change, right? And have that faith, right? That it can be done. Have that faith that you can be the example for the people in your surroundings, in your community, in your family. Be that example, be that evidence. And in that, you know what? Maybe they'll pick up on some of that and you'll be able to widen your community, right? Enhance the understandings within your family, your school, your work relationships, your community, your city, your country, till it gets to the point, right? That we're all on a better track, that we're all going to be in a better situation, that when we are hurting physically, mentally, right, emotionally, that we can trust the people in our communities to express to them what those problems are, because guaranteed somebody in your community has that answer, has that solution, right? For sure. It is in a position to help, but because we wear those masks, right, that we don't ask, right? We turn the other cheek, right? We don't like what people saying, right? But you don't say anything because you were brought up to understand not to say anything if you didn't have something nice to say, that you've never been able to have a voice. And if somebody doesn't know those problems emotionally, mentally, physically, how or why would they be able to help, right? I've learned that one. It's still hard for me. I'm not going to preach on that. I know it's important to be yourself. That's another part of that gift of being yourself when you're not feeling good, when you're in a bad situation, that you can express that. And if somebody has that answer, that solution, those resources to help, that they will out of kindness, right? That's pretty amazing. But because we're so right, right, that we're not even getting the help that we need. We're going through it all by ourselves, right? Sometimes it takes a team, right? Sometimes it takes a group. Sometimes it takes a community, a city, or a world coming together. Oh, it's pretty good. Willingness is faith over doubt, trusting that it can be done, right? We're not quite there yet, but we are getting better and better and better all the time, right? I wouldn't be the person right now that I am if when I was going to school, they had bullying campaigns, right? And a lot of those indigenous families that are struggling right now, they wouldn't be struggling, right? If they had the orange t shirt day in the 60s and 70s, 50s, even, right? In those residential schools, that they would have been able to keep their self respect, right? And avoided those coping mechanisms that were set in place to just cope with what had happened. And that's what we do. We spend a lot of time coping, right? Instead of expressing and sharing and asking and letting people know what's not going right. And yes, 1 out of 10 people will use that as ammo. But isn't it great that you'll be recognizing that 1 out of 10? Yeah, you'll recognize them right off the hop. And you go, okay, that's somebody I'm going to stay away from. That's somebody that's not coming to Sunday dinners. That's somebody that's not marrying my son. Yeah, I don't want to put any ideas in anybody's head. But anyway, you guys, that's what I've got for you tonight. Willingness is faith over doubt. Faith that it's getting better, right? I know it doesn't look that way, but it's always getting better, right? It's just we spend so much time, right, in the yucky that we don't appreciate, right? We don't trust when the good stuff is coming into our lives, right? And it's a generational thing too, right? It's a generational thing too, but it is getting better. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in history, and I tell you, I wouldn't go back in some of those different days and ages because, yeah, there was a lot of crazy town going on. Okay, you guys, that's all I've got for you tonight. We just got our severe thunderstorm warning for our area, possible tornadoes and 75 per hour winds, damaging winds, and hail too coming. It's supposed to hit your city in 15 minutes. Oh, Tammy, send me a message and let me know because it was crazy. It was crazy here in Manitoba. The tornadoes, the storms, the broken branches in the street, the hail as big as the palm of my hand. And I sat here and I watched the entire thing from my window. And of course, getting spooked every 15 minutes with the warnings that were on the phone, right? The alerts. Yeah. And I know you like the storms too. But I hope you have that opportunity just to sit in the window and enjoy the wind and the rain. Yeah, it was pretty exciting. No, the gardens struggling too with that bad weather too, right? Everybody's got their gardens in. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer, and we'll see you tomorrow.